Hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and we're on episode 12 of Monster, and yeah, I couldn't wait. As soon as episode 11 ended, I was like, you're going to end there with this secret that there could be an underground experimental laboratory that Johann came from, and that it's tied to this orphanage, and you're not going to give us any more info. We're just going to have to find out, and Dieter's in the hospital, but we don't know if Tenma's going to go back for him. Can he go back for him? How does that even work? Like, you leave us on a cliffhanger like that, Monster. I can't do it. No. So I was like, nope, I have to find out. So I only really have one comment before we start, and that is from Kessler. Kessler was talking about way back in episode 9 that this series does a really good job of taking its time to be very realistic in explaining itself. And I could not agree more. I love that what Kessler was referring to is that we have an entire episode 9, devoted to explaining why Tenma has his gun, where he's gotten trained from, that there's a whole backstory with it. Because you could see a series doing like, oh, Tenma just got a gun. He got it from somewhere. He was trained, and they would gloss over it. But no, not only does this series take its time to show you that event, but it ties in those characters thematically into the story itself in a very clever, creative, and meaningful way. It's like one of the most understated episodes of the series so far, and it's amazing. I love episode 9 so much, especially Hugo's character and the little girl. So there's that. But Kessler also talked about how, like Nina, with her training, that it explains why she was able to take down the guy in like episode 7, because she had self-defense training. And it's like, yes, all that makes sense. So I'm glad this show takes its time to be very, very realistic and offer concrete reasons to why things are happening. It makes it a very enjoyable watch, and it makes it a better series for it. So good on you, Monster. Way to be realistic and also creep us out too. With the creepiness of this last episode, and I don't think that's going away anytime soon. So yeah. So Dieter, I'm curious about his character, if his character is just gonna be like a one-off side character, but he's in the OP, so clearly he has a big significant impact to the series, because Moorer's not in the OP, and I thought he was pretty significant. So I feel like we're gonna have more with Dieter. Whether that's good or bad. He has a soccer ball, but he looks kind of like tense, so don't know. There's all this stuff about experiments. I want to know more. Lady at the Orphanage 47, you better be talking. And then Tenma just wants answers. So a lot of other people in the comments have talked too about how, Tenma's a fugitive now. So how does that work? And clearly we saw Johann, I can't think of his name now. It's blank. The dad, the foster father, basically try to threaten Tenma with that. So yeah, Hartman, that was it. Hartman threatened him in the last episode. So yeah, the greatest thing about these episodes when I get them off of, because here's the thing, I know that some people have commented that it's going to be on Netflix now starting this month in the US, which is amazing, because I love that, because now you all can watch alongside me and you won't have to like squint your eyes at the screen, right? Which is wonderful. But I'm going to stick to Anthony's Files because I love going into this series and all it says is Monster 12. No episode titles. No idea what I'm getting into. I just open it up and then it just happens. So that's the magic. If I went to Netflix, maybe the quality of the file would be better, perhaps, but it would tell you the episode titles and it would kind of like spoil the fun. I like the surprise of finding out what the episode's called. So yay. So I think that we all should start this episode because I'm pretty excited about it. I hope you all are too, but we're not going to waste any more time. We are going to dive into Monster, episode 12, and just see what the next 23 minutes gives us. So we're going to start that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's do this. Oh, I was just holding onto my seat the whole last half of that because I was like, well, okay. Oh, that episode. I was like, please don't shoot Dieter. But with this episode, you don't know. You don't know with the series at all because we saw Johann kill Junkers. Now, granted, Junkers was an adult. I'm like, would they go to killing a child right in front of us? I don't know. Maybe. With this series, it's called Monster, but But Hartman just ends up being just this cowardly worm who's just wanting someone to follow like a damn cult. Oh, shit. There's a lot implied by this episode. A lot of implications, which is why Whiteboard Coon's out here. Tenma, you gotta take responsibility now. We'll talk about this, but the moment he was like, well, this doesn't concern you, and Tenma's like, well, it concerns me now. It's like, you can't just leave this kid. You either gotta take him to the orphanage yourself and drop him off, or you gotta either take him to the orphanage and drop him off yourself, or you can take him with you. You can't just ditch. I was like, Tenma, don't leave this kid. This kid just had a psychopathic old man tailing him, trying to get him, and you're just gonna leave him at a bus stop and pin a 5 to him and wish him the best of luck? What? Tenma. You're still far too trusting. I'm like, do you not see the problem of that situation? But it was the 90s. It was a different time. It was a time where you could take your kids to the mall, let them run wild, and then come back in 5 hours and pick them up and be like, well, got my afternoon free. Can't do that now, unfortunately, but yeah, no. It's really funny. It reminded me when I was a kid. I remember that I got like so many accelerated reading points in like 6th grade, and I was 12, and my teacher took me and 2 other guys that got like the same amount of points. We went to the mall the day, and she just let us go. She was like, all right, well, I got some shopping I'm going to do. You kids come back and see me at 5, and I'll treat you to dinner. And we just ran loose in the mall all day. A bunch of 12-year-olds. We could have gotten picked up. Nothing was stopping anybody, but she was just like, you guys will be fine. And that was just the mentality back then. Like, everybody's like, nope, you guys are resourceful. You got it. You can don't talk to strangers. Oh my God. This episode got dark, and it's only episode 12. I know it's going to get a lot darker than that, but I was like, holy shit. We do a bit of recap, though, to talk about the 511 Kinderhiem being used to do experiments, right? We do a lot of recap in this episode. My throat's dry, which is problematic because it does take out like 3 minutes of the episode doing a recap, and it's only a 23-minute episode to begin with, minus, you know, the OP and ED. So it ends up being like just 18 episodes, 18 minutes of content. So I feel like this episode went by really quickly. And I don't know how long this discussion will be, but it feels like a little experiment. Man, that was the other thing I want to talk about, is the little experiment, right? List that on here. A little experiment. We're going to talk about that later when Hartman kind of gets on to Tenma about something. And that marker's not nearly dark enough, so we're going to do the 511 Kinderhiem. We'll put it right here. I do like this lady. Again, this series has just like in the last episode, this series has a habit of taking very pretty characters that you think are harmless and making them vile, like Johann and Hartman. And then you have that are like charming characters that charm, you know, the others, like the Hartman guy charmed the one nurse. And then you have this woman that runs the other orphanage who looks really rough and scary, but she actually has a heart of gold. She's like just looking out for these kids and make sure they're not taken advantage of. Which, again, Tenma is our exception to the rule, right? Because you have all these characters that the series shows us as being ugly or looking like they are a menace, and then they turn out to be like a warm, wholesome person. And then you have cold individuals like Hartman and Johann who look beautiful and charming, but then turn out to be monsters. And Tenma's our exception to the rule. He is handsome and charming, and is seemingly an innocent, genuine guy. So it's like, Tenma's our only exception to this, which is fascinating, right? But she talks about what the place was used for, that it was used for an experimentation ground on humans to make them into basically to make child soldiers. Like, it's kind of the idea that the place was to train children to become soldiers, but make it to where they were merciless, cold beings. That was seemingly what it was for, right? That was the little experiment. Okay. Supposedly. I do want to make note, I've finished Death Note at this point, and so if you've not finished Death Note, this will probably not mean anything to you, but the rotating fan blade in the orphanage that they keep tying back to, it just reminds me of Light Yagami, and that's all I'll say without spoiling anything. But curious, right? Very curious. And so Tenma's just listening to her. She's like, can you imagine what these children would be like if they grew up? Well, we can imagine because we know Johann, right? And she says, there's no way to prove that that's what's happening. So yeah, the orphanage burning down eliminates all suspect, right? All the data was burned right before the wall came down. How convenient. How convenient that all the people who were involved in the project ended up escaping. Mm-hmm. There was one person who was able to gloss his record over, and that would have been Hartman. So the only escapee, so the only one to escape the facility was Hartman. Okay, now that's interesting because that tells us two things, or at least according to her, either she doesn't know all her information or not. But that tells us that Liebert and this Dr. Wolf character, they were not at 511 as staff. They may have been connected to 511 and had ties to it, but they were themselves not faculty or staff that were there, because otherwise she would have probably included them in her statement to him. But no, so they may have been separate. The only one to escape was Hartman. Okay. And to remain in this country. Well, okay, but so they could be tied to it, maybe. Or they left the country. Okay, there is that. She says the only one to remain in the country and gloss over his record was Hartman. So Wolf and Liebert, we know Liebert did leave the country, so Wolf could have left the country as well. Okay. Interesting. That devilish project. And I love how Tenma's like, I wish that you would really just tell us about this, right? Also, the fact that Hartman was a pediatric psychiatrist is terrifying, that he had all these kids at his disposal. And I think it's important to note that he was a psychiatrist, which, you know, could be a cover for him doing all those experiments, right? Sure. But yeah, that he was just tied to that, and Tenma's piecing everything together. All that was covered up by the incident. Mm-hmm. And he's like, what incident? It's like the revolt, right? So we know that Johann was involved in a revolt. We'll put Johann up here. And the revolt. The revolt at 511. We'll talk about it. And I love that Tim was like, please tell me what happened. And she's like, I don't know. I've spoke too much. I'm like, no, you haven't. I was so afraid she wasn't going to say anything. I was going to be like, we've spent 2 episodes now trying to find something out, and these one-word answers aren't cutting it. Give us more. Now, I do think it's worth noting that the one lady, the one nurse, the brunette, she did not let Dieter go with Hartman. It was the blonde one that he schmoozed over. Then she just, I don't know, the way that the mangaka drew her, she looked like someone that you could probably schmooze over. She just had that look about her. But all Dieter wants to do is have that soccer ball. Like, that's all he wants. His desires are pretty simple, right? He just wants to have the soccer ball and to know that tomorrow is going to be a better day. And it's like, really? Like, give this kid that. Please! Give him that at least. Oh. And so she says, I really don't know what happened. The East German government at the time put a gag order on it. Yeah, like nobody could talk about it. It all began with the mysterious death of the director. So, if we're going to tie this back, I guess we'll put this here, that the death of the director, gee, I can't imagine who could have orchestrated that. Although, Hartman does make a point of saying that Johann often has other people do things for him. He doesn't often get his hands dirty. And I love that Tenma, when he hears that, he, like, his fists clench, like, he automatically has the suspicion that it's Johann. Like, he just automatically has that idea in his head that it is Johann responsible. He says, soon after that, there was a power struggle amongst the instructors over the director's position. So this is where it gets a little bit interesting, is that the director died, and then there was a power struggle over his position. That's interesting to me because it makes me wonder. It makes me wonder if there had been someone at that facility that was like Tenma and talked to Johann and was like, gee, I wish that this director was dead so I could, if only he was dead, then this terrible stuff would stop. I wish he was dead so I could become the director myself. And then Johann killed him, right? Because the situation doesn't sound that much different, right? It doesn't really. It sounds like when the director, died at Tenma's hospital and Tenma ended up becoming the director. And even before then, when there was all the stuff about Tenma denying to do surgery on the mayor, that led to an internal power struggle. And then the director ended up mysteriously dying. So the circumstances are kind of similar, which is interesting. So I'm curious to know if maybe Dr. Wolf is kind of like the Negaverse 511 equivalent of Tenma, if that's going to be the case. Because that would be really interesting if there was another version of Tenma from a previous time with Johann that had something similar happen like what happened with Johann. That would be interesting, but I don't know if we will get that, if that was meant to be just a throwaway line or what it means. But the orphanage was thrown into anarchy, and the children's internal strife couldn't be controlled. So, this led to anarchy, and the children couldn't be controlled. Which is what makes me think that it was like when Johann, as Hartman said, he just sat up on his throne and ordered them all just to do whatever, and the children revolted. That was the revolt. So the revolt could have been the children against the adults, maybe? Or the adults against one another, maybe, all trying to vie for those positions. Could have been. Huckleberry's like left a ball at some point, but I don't see it, so we'll go on. But yeah, couldn't be controlled, and that's what she said. It's amazing that Johann made it out of there. I don't think so. I think Johann, like Hartman said, he orchestrated the whole thing. He orchestrated the entire procedure. He just walked out of there off his throne, and then Tim was like, what happened to 511? She's like, everyone died. Everyone. All the members of the orphanage, including the instructors, killed each other off in there. And Tim was like, well, we're not just dealing with your average serial killer. No. Everyone but Johann died. Supposedly. So yeah, pretty freaky stuff, right? And then we cut back to Dieter. And God, he looks so happy there. He looks so happy, and he thinks about Tenma telling him that tomorrow's going to be a good day. The world is not all dark and scary. And so I like the idea that Dieter, like Hartman has instilled this fear and darkness in Dieter, right? That there will be no good day. And so that would be enough to break any kid. Like just having over and over again the idea that nothing good is going to come. But then Tenma tells him, no, that's not the case. Tomorrow will be good. It's a new day. It doesn't have to be dark like today, and the future is not dark. So he's a source of light he's a source of light for Dieter. Of course, that leads to the idea that, okay, the phrase that the greater the light, the darker the shadow, right? And what have we been seeing with motifs with both Tenma and Johann? We've seen shadows. So Tenma is this big source of light, but in the same vein, he's casting this huge shadow, and Johann is it. So it's a lot of stuff to think about. But God, the moment where that woman says, you're going home, and he gets so excited, and we see Hartman come in, and that boy's face just drops. It just sinks. And he gets so terrified. No. And Hartman doesn't look scary. He doesn't. He's like the one guy that shot himself back in episode 10. He doesn't look scary. He doesn't look threatening at all. He's just, when you find out what he does, you're like, what the hell? And so then, yeah, he like drags Dieter away, and Dieter tries to say no. But Hartman's like, you're a good boy, aren't you? So you'll come here, won't you? And God, when he stares at Dieter with those like soulless eyes, what the hell? Oh, it's messed up, y'all. It is messed up. Now, of course, Tenma, he freaks out at the hospital. He's like, I come to get the kid. He's gone. What are you doing? And the other nurse is like, well, he was more of a gentleman than you. Right, because y'all don't know what he's going to do. It's like, I feel for Tenma. It's like, oh my God. And I also think that there is something like culturally there too. Tenma is a Japanese guy in the midst of Germany, and this woman was easily wooed by this, German man. So it's like, yeah, there is some culture stuff there too. But, and he goes to the apartment that was Hartman's and then finds the photos. So apparently he wasn't writing anything of significance in the letters, because to Tenma, nothing in the letters stood out, right? But then when he looks at the photos, and the photos are all in front of the same place that looks like Kinderhiem, right? He's like, they're all taken at different times, but they were all taken at the same place. And it was in front of 511, and there is who we presume is the Wolfman, but we don't know for sure, with Johann. Terrifying. Terrifying, y'all. No. They were all taken at that same place. And so he thinks, okay, well, this man's clearly crazy. Maybe he took Dieter to the 511 place as well. Maybe there's a connection there. I need to at least go look. But there's this really, really creepy implication that he killed those other boys. I think that that's meant to be implied, because we told Tim at the beginning that this one went off to college, this one went off in the military, blah, blah. No, he took them to this cult-like place with a throne, and when they didn't end up like Johann, he killed them. No. Why? Just freaking weird. God, when we saw the flames, though, and the soccer ball, like, bouncing down the steps, I was like, I thought he was dead. I thought that's where this series was going. I thought Tenma was going to find those stairs. He was going to look up, and that kid was going to be, like, flayed, or something terrible was going to happen to him. Or he was going to be at the top, and Hartman was going to kill him. That's where my mind went. I thought it was going to be, like, the ultimate tragedy. Thank God it wasn't. But, oh my God. That soccer ball, because I was like, Tenma's not had a good break at all this series, at all. And so I was like, well, it would continue our dark poetry with him if he rescues this kid and his involvement leads to his death. That would just let's keep the train a-moving, shall we? Oh my God. But yeah, him just sitting there atop the stairs with a flame on his throne. So let's just look at we have the flame. And we have this throne. And we have the oiled cloth metaphor that we'll talk about. Just adding fuel to the fire, right? Johann gives off very much Antichrist vibes in all of this. Very much Lucifer vibes. I'm just like, maybe not even Lucifer, but just definite Antichrist vibes of like this coming kid that's a leader. He's like the Antichrist. He's like born a leader and he's handsome. Everybody flocks to him. Nope. Nope. And I thought Dieter was dead because he just got the pulp beat out of him. I guess Hartman was kind enough to give him an arm sling at least. Oh my God. I was like, oh good, you beat this kid to a pulp, but you gave him an arm sling. Cool. Good on you. At least you're that kind, right? But then, yeah, Tenma goes up there to get him and then sees Hartman come out from behind in the shadows. Hartman from the shadows. That's a great visual there, right? And it says the boy can't see it. So there's this thing that he says about him. He says that Dieter can't see it. He doesn't see the vision in the flames. He's not Melisandre. He doesn't see the vision in the flames. He can't see what Johann saw from here back then. So he's been looking he has been looking for another Johann. I'm surprised he doesn't just try to seek out adult Johann, although if adult Johann found him, he'd probably kill him, so I don't know. And then poor Dieter. And he says, it's no good, it's no good. Again, meaning he's brought other boys here to this cultish spot, seeing if they were Johann, and when they weren't, he blew their brains out. But yeah, he looks so creepy there, Hartman does. He says this boy isn't Johann either. And Tenma's like, yeah, I've had about enough of these cults and these crazy people. I feel like Tenma's like, why am I surrounded? Am I a crazy person magnet? I feel like he just feels like he's just surrounded by insane people. And he just smiles, Hartman does, saying everyone died. So either he wasn't there or he somehow got out. And then Tenma's like, what the hell? And he's like, 10 years ago. And there's like bullet holes in the walls. The instructors and the orphans, all 50 of them died. And there's like stuff beaten up, like everything. Johann watched it. He watched it all from here. And Tenma's like, what the hell? And so then Hartman goes on to talk about the incident that day. And Tenma looks up and sees Johann just like looking very smug as a child, just staring, looking down at the wall, right? That Johann, he watched the 50 kill each other. Okay. Saying that he watched it all. And so at that point, Tenma like flashes back and he's like, he has to remind me, he has to like shake his head and be like, no, that's not Johann up there, it's Dieter. And he says, I asked Johann, what did you do? What did you do to kill them? So at some point, Hartman, he saw Johann after the 5/11 incident, right? He saw him afterwards, which adds a whole new context now to Hartman being like, he seemed like he was terrified when he was telling Tim of it, but was he terrified or was he like elated, right? And so he asked him, what did he do to make it happen? He replied, I just dropped a piece of oil-soaked cloth into the fire like this. And Dieter's like, what the hell, no. I'm not impressed. And Tim was just like, is this like some kind of magic seance? Is something going to happen? He's like, what do you think? Do you know what this means? Hatred is created when people gather. So, there's the idea throughout this that hatred is created when people gather. Meaning it's that tried and true theme that's ran through so many anime I've watched in the last year, and that's that when people get together, there's conflict, and that we can't avoid the conflict. Seems like something that's been themed in other shows like Attack on Titan, Neon Genesis, the idea that, when people gather together, there's going to be conflict. As long as there are people, there's going to be conflict, which comes up because that's part of Johann's goal, right? He says that all he had to do was just add fuel to the fire. So the oil-soaked cloth is just a metaphor. He's like, all I had to do was get these people together, say enough stuff to get them to hate each other, and then they just did stuff on their own. I didn't even have to do anything. I just stoked the fire, and that's all. I just poured a little oil on it. That's all it needed to happen. I didn't have to do anything else. And Hartman's like, that's what he said. A 10-year-old boy. Like, again, like the blind man said, a boy that was wise beyond his years, right? And he pulled it off. And at that point, that's the only time Hartman, gets elated is when he, recounts this episode. He says he had 50 people kill each other without moving a finger. Well, he technically, moved his mouth and stuff, but he didn't have to, force them to do it physically. And then he says, your experiments turn him. Now, here's the thing. Tenma tries to blame the 511 for causing Johann to be this way. Tenma says that it's 511's fault that Johann became like that. And again, another theme with another character from a series that I've been reviewing is this idea of nature versus nurture. Did being at 5'11" make Johann become like that? Did being at 5'11" make Johann come like that? Or has Johann always been this way and he was just trapped within 5'11" and it just all festered from the inside until it like ate itself out, right? It just ate itself from the inside, like cannibalized itself. Because then Hartman's like, we did this. No. They're like, no, we did not do this at all. He was always like this. No. He's like, he's been like this from the start. He says Kinderhiem was indeed an experimental ground. It was a project to raise orphans to become perfect soldiers. But I liked this line that Hartman says. He's like, thinking back now, it was such a small experiment. So weird. They says that the little experiment was just trying to brainwash kids. It's like, that's Tinker Toys compared to what Johann's doing. Which is terrifying, right? Very terrifying. It's a bit much. He's like, it was such a small experiment. And he's like, Johann, do you think Johann's a soldier? No. Johann's a leader. That's the creepiest part. Is that Johann, he's like, we were trying to turn kids into like just followers. He's like, Johann was a born leader. Which is interesting because that kind of connects over to Tenma. Tenma is not really a follower either. Tenma does his own thing. He's kind of a leader himself. So him and Johann, again, another little similarity between the two. Neither of them like follow like sheep. They're both very much leaders and they inspire others. That's the thing, is that like Tenma, Johann can inspire. He gets people to follow him. Only with Tenma so far, it's been through kindness, and with Johann, it's been through fear. So that's interesting. He was someone who was meant to stand at the top. There's no way we could create such a work of art. And then you see him like just smiling, like it's the most expressive we've seen him this entire series. He was superhuman from the beginning, a monstrous being. So suggesting that he has been a monster from the start. That it's nature over nurture. It's like, no, he was always like this. Again, connecting back to other main characters in other series. He foretold that everyone would end up hating and killing each other. So, in turn, he says after that his whole goal is that he wants to be the last person alive. He said that to be the last person remaining in this world. So, okay. He wants to be the last one. Which again, ties back to the idea that as long as there are two people, there will always be conflict. But if Johann's the only one, what do we do? So that begs the question of where Anna falls into this, Anna or Nina. Because if he wants to be the last person remaining, then would he kill his sister? He says he only trusts his sister, so what do we do with that? Where do we go to from here with that information? And poor Tenma. Tenma's just like, hell no. Tenma's like, okay, we've got enough crazy town lore. Give me Dieter and let me get out of here with him, because you're no good. And then Hartman says the future is dark, Dieter. You've got to become even just a little more like Johann. That's so twisted. That's so twisted that he tells Dieter that because there's so much darkness, you have to be like Johann to survive. I hate that. I'm like, no, leave Dieter alone. It's like you either go the Johann route where you believe you have to be a monster to live, or you do the Tenma route where you're like, no, we can make this work. So it's just, seeing these two ideologies clashing. He's like, why is it no good? Why can't you be like Johann? Why can't you be like him? And then I love that Tenma, I thought Tenma was going to kill him. I thought a lot of things was going to happen in this standoff. I thought one, that Hartman was going to like fire the gun at Dieter. I thought Tenma might. I was like, is this the moment where Tenma kills someone? Is it Hartman? But no, Hartman ends up being a coward. But I thought he was going to let Dieter run down to Tenma and like shoot him at the last minute. That's what I thought was going to happen, but it does not. It says, I'll shoot you if you harm him anymore. He says, get out. And then that's when Hartman says, this is our problem. So he's basically saying, okay, Tenma, fine. Take responsibility. Which is what he has to end up doing with Dieter. But he's like, no, this is our business. You stay out of this. This has nothing to do with you. Let us just do our thing. It's fine. And Tenma's like, no, I'm not going to let you kill this kid. And poor Dieter, he just looks like he's resigned. Like, to his fate. And for a second, Hartman kind of like teases Tenma, saying that he'll offer him information. He's like, what are you going to do once you find all this out? He's like, I think it's impossible to find and kill him. He's like, you can't kill Johann. And Tenma says nothing in response. So he said, fine, I'll tell you one piece of information and in turn you leave. And which I'm like, he's not going to leave, so you're just giving him a free bit of information. I'm like, that's not going to work, but okay. And he tells him, and like he has the gun. Here's the thing that's rather important though about this scene. When you look at the barrel of the gun and where it's aimed at, it's aimed between Hartman and the boy. It's not really aimed at Hartman. So Tenma does not want to shoot Hartman. He really doesn't. He's done target practice with Hugo. So you know if he just moved the gun over a hair, he would be able to shoot. He'd be able to shoot. But as he is now, he's only aiming at either nothing or Hartman's hand. And that's it. He's not aiming to kill him. So I think that's really important. I think that's important to note that Tenma, even if he feels like he has to shoot Hartman, he's not aiming to kill him. So there's that. But you can't tell from this angle from Hartman's perspective. He says, General Wolf. He's the one who discovered Johann's skill. So, not a doctor, but rather a general from the military. I wonder if he found him and his sister at the border and saw firsthand what he could do. Maybe. But he thinks he's alive. And so Tim asks if he's a man from the study. And Hartman doesn't look surprised that he was in his study. He doesn't look, like, concerned. He said he's the one who brought Johann to us. He should know something. And he tells him to leave. And Tim was like, no. And Tim was like, you know what? I'm not going. He's like, there's nothing to worry about. I'll shoot Hartman if he puts his finger on the rifle's trigger. Which it's not yet. And Hartman's like, he doesn't think Dieter's going to leave. He thinks he has him like Stockholm syndrome to the point where he'll stay. And I love that one shot where Dieter like slowly turns his head to look at Hartman when he starts to laugh at Tenma. I was like, oh my God. And then Tenma says, decide for yourself. Make your own decision. It's a lot to tell a little kid, right? It's a lot to tell a kid. Be like, all right, but Tenma's saying, I mean, at this point, I'm like, Tenma, you do need to take responsibility for Dieter because you did, you know, give Dieter the choice and then took him out and told him to get on a bus without any supervision. But he gives Dieter the choice. I think this is a really important turning point for Tenma's character because Tenma, back when he saved Johann, he took matters into his own hands and was like, I will save Johann. I will save this boy and stake my reputation upon it. That's changed a little bit now because now Tenma is giving Dieter the choice. You can either stay and probably die or come with me and see what happens. But it's going to be Dieter's choice. Tenma is not going to, he's getting to the point where he's letting other people decide their fates, right? He's not trying to influence it as much. I mean, he's obviously influenced it because he has a gun pointed at Hartman, but he's letting Dieter make the choice. Do you want to come with me or do you want to stay? And that's a big turning point for Tenma, considering where he's been the last several episodes, right? And at first, I didn't know if he would go or not. I was like, he's just going to stay and be killed. But then he chooses to go. And he walks down off the throne. And Hartman is just floored that Dieter would leave him. I thought he was going to shoot him. I thought that as this boy descended the stairs, he was going to shoot Dieter. But no, he didn't. And the man says the world is dark and tomorrow is dark. But he goes to Tenma's side. And he says that Tenma told me tomorrow will be a good day. Which is, again, showing that both Tenma and Johann, they have that ability to draw people to them. And I thought Tenma was going to shoot him, but no, he doesn't. He, collapses and lets him go. And then when they got back on the road here, I was going to be like, oh, my darling, oh, my darling. We're going part 3. But I'm like, Tenma, do not take him. You are in the middle of nowhere. Johann's at large. You're in the middle of nowhere. And you dropped him off with a note to that woman, Elna, saying that she's going to let you stay. He just gives it to him here you go. I'm like, at least see him to the bus or take him to the orphanage, damn it. You say you can't stay in town, but you've been in town a pretty damn long time already. Tenma. And then the boy, I love that he kicks the ball towards him and Tenma's like, no. It's like, when your dog follows you and Tenma's like, no, stay there. And then the dog keeps coming forward and you're like, stay there. And it just keeps happening. And now Huck's looking at me like, I do stay. But I don't know. I very much predict that next episode it's going to be a thing like with Heckle where it's kind of a misdirect where we think that Dieter is going to be with Tenma and he ends up taking him to the orphanage. That's what I think is going to happen. I can't foresee Tenma taking this kid with him wherever he goes. That's a huge liability. So I feel like we're just ending the episode with that, but he's going to take Dieter to the orphanage himself and drop him off. That's my prediction anyway. But then we have the ED. The ED is changing. I wondered that when I started this episode because it's episode 12. I'm like, usually a core is 12 episodes long. So I'm like, I know if we're not changing the OP and ED, I was like, I wonder if we'll change parts of the ED at some point. And we have. We start where the ED left off at. And we see the monster, one of the monsters, goes and finds this man that looks like he's an axe cutter, like he has an axe in his hands. And the monster is looking at him. And it's a close-up of the man and the monster looking at each other. So I don't know if it's supposed to represent the monster coming to humanity and interacting with humanity and getting them riled up. If it's supposed to represent Johann stoking the flames because he goes in the town and stokes the fire. Maybe. But then what does the other monster do? We don't know yet, right? We don't know. I'm almost as excited to see how the ED changes over time as opposed to anything else. But yeah, this episode, it was tense. Very tense, and I didn't like it because it was tense, but I did like it overall because Dieter made it out alive. Hartman was defeated. We learned more about Johann and how terrifying he is because he can get people to kill each other without lifting a finger. And we have basically Tenma is now helping this kid get to the orphanage, and then I'm assuming Tenma is on his quest to find General Wolf. What that will lead us, I don't know, but this was a good episode, but man, it was tense. So I'm curious to know your thoughts down below. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe. Take care. I hope you enjoyed this reaction, but I will be back next week with another fun-filled family fare episode of Monster. Bye.